Greetings, urban farmers, gardeners, and healthy food visionaries. Greg Peterson here, and welcome to the 266th episode of the Urban Farm Podcast, where 3 days a week we work together educating and inspiring you to become part of your food revolution. Nature doesn't waste energy, and by using natural cycles to work in our favor, we can harvest both plants and fish. Let us teach you how. Just text Grow Fish to 33444 or visit iwanttogrowfish.com and you will receive our free webinar on how to grow your own fish-powered garden. Today on our podcast, we have someone who is working to bring multiple aspects of sustainability together in his part of the food revolution. We're talking to Jonathan Pereira about what is beyond sustainable. Jonathan holds a BS in Geology and a Master's in Science Education and has worked as an informal science educator for over 15 years before joining the nonprofit organization Plant Chicago. He has developed numerous innovative programs, including Greencorps Youth Program in Chicago and Greentrack at Manhattan Comprehensive Night and Day School in New York. In 2012, he was nominated with his students from the Global High School for the Zayed Future Energy Prize. As executive director, Jonathan is working to bring the circular economy to life inside Plant Chicago and outward into the neighborhood. He sees the future where businesses work together to ensure both the economy and the environment are thriving. Welcome to the show today, Jonathan.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Well, thank you for being here. I've been fascinated with Plant Chicago for many years, so I'm loving that you're here. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at now?
Sure. Before I became executive director of Plant Chicago, I bounced around quite a bit. I think there's sort of two what seem like conflicting, but what I see as overlapping narratives in my life. One is doing a lot of environmental education in non-traditional environments. And then that ranges from forest preserves to museums just to really special projects within public schools in New York and Chicago. And then the other side of that is doing a lot of live performance, so theater work and writing social satires as well. So those are really two tracks that I was taking throughout my life. But the connecting thread through all of them was really a focus on social and environmental justice, thinking about how do we create an equitable world where not only were you just focused on quote-unquote traditional like environmental issues, but also how everyone can benefit from a better world.
Right. So, Jonathan, it sounds like you're in a bit of a construction zone there.
Yeah, we are located in the plant, which is in a collaborative community of food businesses, all working to reduce their waste. And it is and has been an active construction site for many years.
Uh-huh.
And construction noises pop up pretty much any time you need a quiet conversation.
Oh, right. All right. Well, you know what? I'll tell you what. The conversation about what you guys are up to there, and I'll use your word, the narrative of what you're up to there is so incredibly important. We'll put up with a little bit of background noise, I promise.
That's great to hear.
So, Plant Chicago, tell me what it is, and then we'll go to the why here in a little while.
Sure. Well, there's multiple things going on, which can often be confusing. But there's the plant, which is a project. It's a building, and right now that building and the project is composed of over 15 for-profit, all small food businesses, and a for-profit owner-developer of the building. And you also have nonprofit Plant Chicago, and we are co-located with all these businesses in the plant. And our mission is to develop circular economies. And if you think about circular economies, in case your listeners are not familiar, there is actually no standardized definition for it. And the easiest way for me to describe it is what it's not. It's not linear. We have an economic system, especially in the United States right now, where we design products and have systems that are, refer to this take, make, and dispose culture, where we take resources, often new or virgin materials out of the earth. We make something out of it, and then it's designed to be disposed, or the system is designed in a way that ends up sending a lot of materials to the landfill or into the environment where the materials are not safe for the environment, have detrimental impacts. So in a circular system, you actually, you eliminate this idea of the landfill, and you use only energy from renewable resources. You recapture as many materials as possible. You can take the outputs from one process and use it as an input for another, either within one business or between businesses, which is the really exciting thing when we talk about circular economies, is having businesses work together.
Yeah.
There's other parts of it as well that can really help facilitate this movement away from a linear system towards a circular system. And if you think about the real problem of humanity, and we get caught on these sort of short-term problems, right? Like climate change, for example, is a short-term problem. If you think about it, we live in a world, in a geological sense, is a short-term problem. We live in a world where there's finite resources, but we are operating as if there are infinite resources to consume. So we are spending a lot of energy taking materials out of the ground and then not finding a use for them afterwards. We're losing them into hard-to-reach places like our river. Like if you think about nitrogen and phosphorus, we lose those into our rivers and oceans.
Right.
You think about rare earth metals, right? They have products that are designed that is really hard to recapture those. So in a circular system, or like the long-term path of humanity, like we can't continue to operate that way. We have to design products in a system that is actually regenerative. It's recapturing those materials and is at its core really making the world a better place.
Yeah.
Regenerative by design is the phrase that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation uses.
Right. This goes to the core for me of I call it the S word anymore, the sustainability word, and I just want to throw this thought at you and get your impression. And that is that I see sustainability as kind of a stopgap measure between doing nothing and what we really need to be doing is, basically building circular economies or building regenerative systems. And sometimes people will say to me, oh, well, is sustainability a bad thing? And I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think it's the stopgap between doing nothing to really, doing something that makes a difference.
Yeah, well, so this is the one, core issue right now is sustainability it's a loaded word now.
Yeah.
So it's become associated unfairly with the idea of, like environmentalism, that it is the certain domain of the privileged for wealthy people, and in some cases it's wrapped up with race as well.
Right.
Or it is the unfair label of being a job killer, which is the opposite, right? These jobs in environmental careers and sustainability, actually, that there's huge opportunities there, especially compared to coal or other examples like that. But then, that word sustainability as well, right? When we talk about it, there's a potential too that when we start thinking about cradle to cradle or circular economies, that those then take on that same stigma, right?
Right.
That,
exactly.
Certain sectors of the economy say, no, that's not good for us. The benefit that the circular economy term has is that its very core is economic success, the shared economic success.
Yeah.
Which I would argue could very much be a part of sustainability. But since it's not in the name, different people, approach it differently.
Right.
But there's also this real danger as well that the circular economy, is you start this movement toward it, it will take on, again, this same idea of that is a problem for the privileged. The people who can afford to do it, the wealthy, the large businesses,
right.
In the U.S. Become associated with whiteness as well.
Right.
And it's not. I mean, the environmental issues often, and climate change in general, is going to impact lower income communities and U.S. communities of color disproportionately.
Exactly.
So it really is, it's a universal issue, and the promise really of a circular economy is that it can, the rising tide will lift all boats. And we have to, this is the time now to really be engaging everyone at every socioeconomic level in this process and making sure that as we design circular system, it isn't just something that large businesses benefit from or corporate executives, that there is a real tangible benefit to people, to small businesses in low-income communities.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like this notion of a circular economy is very collaborative rather than competitive.
Yeah, so what is it? Some people have talked about cooperation. Like you cooperate and compete at the same time.
Oh, interesting. I've not heard that word before.
I don't know. Maybe I made it up.
I like it.
To me, and this is possibly coming from the theater world as well, if you think about small businesses, I don't think it's in small businesses' best interest to like really try and compete hardcore with each other, because especially with a new product or service, because as a new product or service is delivered on the market, if someone has a bad experience with it, then they're less likely to seek it out from another company.
Right.
So the analogy in the theater world is that you have a small theater company. You actually want your competitor to have a really good show, because someone goes see their show and they're like, you know what, I want to see more of this.
Yes.
I'm going to go try some other stuff out.
Yeah.
It's a similar thing when you have small food businesses that are maybe growing niche market products or producing niche market products. If someone's producing a bad product out there, they come, and look at your product and go, I tried that before. I don't want to try it. It's gross. Or it just wasn't good, or the service was bad. So, there are limits to that, right? You don't want a whole community where everybody is trying to
do the same thing,
produce the same thing.
Yeah.
But in the plant itself, the exciting thing is that there are businesses that are all co-located together. They're all food businesses, and you can start. The success of one company actually does. You have a vested interest in making sure that one company is successful, because that ultimately means that you are going to be more successful.
I would guess that it would bring more people in too.
Yeah. So the nice partnership we have going now is the brewery is open, Weiner Brewery, which is located in the plant. Our Plant Chicago runs a year-round farmers market, and we do it in collaboration with their tap room. So when people are coming to the farmers market, they go, oh, I can get beer here too. Let me try one. I'm going to come back sometime, even if I don't want one now.
Bonus.
Or vice versa, people want the beer, and like, well, I'll pick up some beets while I'm here.
Right, exactly. Wow, how cool is that?
So in a market, you think about the future of farmers markets as well. It's depending on the location in the country, farmers markets are probably going to have a really hard time, especially in the next 3 years. If we're not thinking about how many different things they can be. So if it's just a platform for farmers to sell their products, and there's counterexamples to this all over. Take Madison, Wisconsin, for example. They have a gigantic farmers market, a lot of local support for it. That is what it is. But the smaller markets around, being creative in what you are actually doing. Are you just providing a direct point of sale for farmers and for consumers to interact? Or are you actually using it as a way to create a stronger community? So we actually, we have the brewery on site as well, but we try and do as many workshops as possible. So we have lots of cooking demonstrations that feature products that are at the market. That's something a lot of farmers markets do as well. But adding a local component as well, so making sure that the community where we're located, which is around us primarily Mexican-American, that there are artists that represent the community participating in the market, and local vendors as well, that it becomes a safe place for people to congregate. So it can be a very positive community building experience.
Right. Wow. All right, so let's step back here. There's two things going on here. We've got Plant Chicago and we've got the plant. Let's start with the plant. This is a old meat packing plant, right?
Yeah. So the building itself is located at the southwestern end of what was the Union Stockyards, colloquially known as the hog butcher for the world, for close to 100 years, from the 1860s to the 1960s.
Wow.
at times over 80% of the meat processed in the country was processed in this part of the country in Chicago.
Uh-huh.
Now, the building we're in was never a slaughterhouse, but it was for over 80 years, from the mid-1920s to 2007, did process a lot of ham. So there's a lot of pork, rather.
Right.
Ham being one of the products that came out of the building. When the company that owned it shut down their operations in the building itself sat on the market for 3 years, and then a developer by the name of John Edel, who is the sole proprietor of Bubbly Dynamics, purchased the building with the idea of repurposing the existing infrastructure to create a community of food.
Wow. He bought this building with the idea of doing this to it.
Yeah, and I would say,
bless him.
Over the years, things have evolved a bit.
Well,
A lot of things have happened organically, namely in terms of the diversity of businesses that are in here. So you take a couple of examples. There's more traditional things like a beer company and a wood-fired bread company, a coffee roaster. But then there's other things like a spice importer, an ice company that makes perfectly clear ice.
Wow.
Vegan ice cream.
Uh-huh.
These things that are not something you're like, oh yeah, I need to make sure that's a part of my system.
Right, exactly.
They're just other companies that fit in with the ethos here and have plugged in to it as well. Yeah, the square footage of the building is about 93,000 square feet, and there's an additional 2 acres of area outside, which currently has a couple of other more traditional in-ground growers. And then there's a portion of that project outside which is dedicated to a future anaerobic digester project. It's partially completed right now. So you have this 15 businesses, Plant Chicago, the nonprofit, and Bubbly Dynamics, the owner-developer of the building.
Wow. So tell me, when you think about, how long have you been there as a...
This August it'll be 2 years.
2 years. So you've been working on and interacting with this space for the past 2 years, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of change and a lot of growth over that 2-year period.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking back over those 2 years, what is one thing that stands out about the space that really speaks to what you guys are all about?
Well, I guess there's 2 levels. There's the actual infrastructure, and then there's the people inside it. So I'll start with the latter one. This idea of making systemic change, it relies on people doing it.
Right.
So there's these 2 parts. There's the infrastructure, which you can build to help facilitate it or become more efficient or capture waste energy for reuse, but that doesn't do it all, right? So the people and the people running those businesses really are an integral part of it, and you need a driving force there, and that's really where Plant Chicago is hoping to fill the need, is to work with people and incentivize behavior. So, because even the most well-intentioned people and the hardcore environmentalists or sustainability people or the circular economy people, you can lose sight of these things if it becomes too hard, or if you don't see the economic benefit.
Right.
So it really does require this sort of extra force to help people along to collaborate together to make sure that there is systemic change.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, cool. So one of these things I want to kind of dig into a little deeper is, let's talk about food flow through the space that turns into waste flow and what happens. So let's say do you have a juicing company in there?
There isn't. That would be great, though.
All right.
So great economic opportunity right there.
Great. Yeah, no kidding. All right. Well, name one of the organizations on site that actually brings in and uses food.
So let's start with Pleasant House Bakery. Pleasant House, they have a restaurant off-site just a few miles away. And then their bakery is on site, so it's a wood-fired bakery. So they bring in local as possible, grain that's local as possible, which is still outside of the city.
Right.
Of course, because we don't have grain growing in the city limits. So they source it local, they'll mill it on site. They use renewable energy, which is wood. It's a renewable source of energy.
Right.
And then they also end up aggregating lots of food scraps. So from other growers or producers in the building that maybe have things that are not edible or not good for sale, we'll end up working that into some sort of dish or bread product. They've experimented with using spent brewer's grain in the bread. They had a former baker there that actually made a SCOBY preserves. So using the SCOBY from the kombucha brewer to make a preserves, which is actually surprisingly delicious.
Wow.
He also used honey on site as well. So it was this combination of all these hyper-local ingredients.
Right. So then the bakery and the other restaurants, they have food scraps, right?
Sure, but actually not that much. So Plant Chicago, working with an intern from University of Illinois Chicago last year, and we're picking up on this work with Illinois Institute of Technology this year, did a material flow analysis of the building to see, literally capture all the materials that were flowing in, flowing out, and flowing between. So to see how much material came in, how much went out, and then what was going in inter-businesses.
Right.
And, what was found, the two single largest materials in the building, which was like almost all of it, was water and spent brewer's grains, or the grains coming in for the brewing process.
Right.
So all of the brewer's grains are being reused on, being reused on site right now. And then the water itself, there's a lot of potential for it. So there's actually relatively little water reuse on site right now, although there's lots of different plans and ideas on how to do that. So when you think about, overall the materials, the food itself that's being produced, most of it is being eaten. It's leaving the building, maybe because someone buys it at the market, or it goes out for a special order to a local restaurant, or it's being fed to our livestock, or Plant Chicago's livestock, which is fish and chicken. We have fish in our demonstration aquaponics farm, and chickens outside. So that's the ancient version of your circular economy is feeding your food to your livestock. Right.
Well,
not a revolutionary idea.
Yeah.
Except,
I've always thought that spent grain would make a great food for fish and for chicken because it's partially fermented. So that makes it breaks down the enzymes better, and therefore I would think makes it better for them.
Well, I'm not aware of any livestock that is fed on a pure spent grain diet. It's not complete. A lot of the sugar has been stripped out of it through the fermentation process. We did an experiment last year just to see how much spent grain we could feed to our fish, and found that once you went above a third spent grain compared to the commercial fish feed, the fish just didn't grow as fast.
Oh, right.
So there was
makes sense.
there's a tipping point there where the fish just they weren't either getting enough or they weren't eating enough to grow.
Right.
So we continue to feed them about 25% spent brewer's grain to offset the commercial fish feed that we buy.
Well, and another thing I've noticed at the farmers market is that one of our bakers has they have spent grain bread. Now, I noticed that you mentioned that your bakery was experimenting with that. What kind of success are they having?
The ones that I've had have been delicious.
Yeah.
The one challenge with that is that you can't do 100% spent grain. You have to do a percentage of it, right? Because again, a lot of the sugars have been stripped out of it. So, the early experience have tasted delicious to me. I know they've used some brewer's yeast as well to leaven the bread as well. So there's all these nice little connections between it. Yeah. The brewer itself, the wine brewery will use excess things that have been grown on site, one of the outdoor farmers.
Oh, yes.
Max has all this chamomile. So the chamomile is going to the brewery, right? So there's these, you think about the system that's here, it's a microcosm of what is out there in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
But everybody's co-located. And it's not, when you talk about designing a system too, the hard thing is that we often think about like one entity trying to control it all, which can also become burdensome.
Oh, big time.
Right. In a way, there's a freedom here where there actually is no single entity controlling the system. There's all of these businesses that are making their product well, that have to work, that want to find out ways to work together.
So what I see happening here is a lot of sharing of resources. So when the brewery has spent grain, do they give it or do they sell it to the bakery?
Everything is being given at this point, and that is an interesting thing to think about, like creating a circular economy. So in many ways, a circular economy is sort of a first world or developed world idea. When you go to other parts of the world, you go to like Cuba or India, and people look at you and go, well, that's what we're already doing.
Right.
Where resources are limited, we're forced to do all of this. This is the way we think. So in a way, like a circular economy is attacking an issue where we're planning for a day where resources are scarce, but trying to put it on a system where the resources aren't scarce yet.
Right.
But what happens there is that you get a lot of informal systems where there's materials flowing between businesses where nobody's measuring it, or maybe there isn't someone buying it, or there's a bartering system where we'll do this in exchange, or literally just say, hey, take my extra stuff.
Yeah.
I don't want it. You got a use for it. That's great.
Yeah.
So one thing I'd really like to be able to do is thinking about how do we measure the real economic impact of this informal system? When the coffee roaster has all this extra burlap, and a grower takes that burlap to use it as a growing medium instead of something else, how does it impact their bottom line?
Yeah.
When a mushroom company takes excess organic nutrients like coffee chaff or spent grain, what's the impact on their bottom line if they don't have to buy straw to grow the mushrooms?
Yeah.
So that in itself is a gigantic project, and one thing we're really trying to work on in the next year is coming up with a system, A, to incentivize certain behavior, but B, to also start measuring the actual economic and environmental impact of informal system. And is there a way we can formalize it?
Well, the one of the premises of permaculture is share the surplus, because when we look at nature has all this surplus, and unfortunately, we as human beings, when we see surplus, often it's trash or pollution. So, yeah, I love that how you're working on that. So your website says closed loop open source. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, we really want to. So the closed loop part is this idea of, like, if you're creating circular systems, you want to close as many waste loops as possible and localize them as much as possible in order to reduce the amount of energy that actually has to go into the process of closing that loop. So, like, thinking about the plant itself, the infrastructure here, how much within the infrastructure and the businesses inside it, how many waste loops can you close in there? The open source is that the research project that we do, which is really looking at the potential of sharing these waste streams, or the outputs from one business to the input for another. What is the economic and environmental potential of that?
Yeah.
And open sourcing that online as much as possible. Right. So we do projects throughout the year, and we'll put them online on our blog site. And then we'll also start partnering with outside academic research institutions as well, because there's an amazing opportunity here as you start thinking about real-world applications of some of these ideas.
Right.
Moving away from theory to like real analysis.
Happening. Yeah.
Actually happening. So we've done a lot of stuff with Illinois Institute of Technology and starting to do more with other academic institutions, reaching out to the University of Chicago, University of Illinois, as I said before, and places like Loyola. We're actually this weekend hosting a portion of the Industrial Symbiosis Conference
Ooh.
which is in Chicago.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. So thinking about how could academic researchers from all over the world use it as a testing ground or a research ground.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Cool.
So that's when we talk about open sourcing.
Yeah.
And, the other challenge, too, with a lot of scientists right now is that their work often gets stuck in academic journals where only other scientists are reading it.
Yep.
Whereas we really have an opportunity with the thousands of people that come through our facility and our program, and Plant Chicago's programs, to really draw attention to some of this exciting and important academic work that outside people are doing that applies, and you can see it in practice here at the plant or within the businesses at the plant.
Right, exactly. So before we move on, I want to talk about Plant Chicago a little bit and the purpose of Plant Chicago. That's the nonprofit piece. So can you give us a couple of minutes about that?
Yeah. So I run the nonprofit. I'm the executive director of Plant Chicago. As of before, our mission is to develop circular economies. We really have three main program areas right now. We do a lot of education around circular systems. So we do hands-on workshops either for the general public, subjects such as aquaponics, composting techniques, core circular principles in the food system. And then we'll also work with a lot of school groups. So we had over 3,000 K through 12 students come through last year in our programs.
Nice.
And a lot of them did hands-on workshops focusing on subjects such as the nitrogen cycle, water chemistry, the role of pollinators in our system, and circular economies as well. Drawing connections to their actual school curriculum, but again, bringing it back to the quote-unquote real world.
Yeah.
So it's an opportunity for young people to, in the city, especially in urban environments, to think about how their food is grown, how energy is produced and used, and the materials, right, that we use in our everyday lives, which ones are particularly unsuited towards circularity and which ones are much better for it.
Yeah.
So that's what our education programs focus on, really making those connections. And then we have this year our market program. So a part of that is our year-round farmers market.
Right.
We have 26 a year, and it features not just folks that are growing and producing at the plant, but all over the south, southwest, south, and west sides of Chicago as well. So we are the building and our nonprofit, we're located in a part of Chicago that has a low household income in general. It's a low-income, low-access community, so what the USDA would call a food desert.
Yeah.
And our neighborhood, too, it's close to 18% of the population speaks Spanish only. So we're really in a part of Chicago that can benefit from this. And it's for us, for Plant Chicago, it's really important that when you bring a project like this, there is a tangible impact in the community. So our market features a lot of local vendors that are from the community. So any money that comes from outside can make its way into the back of the arts community.
Right.
And then we accept link cards, which in Illinois and we double the value on produce. So people come in, they can get twice as much for what. So it's a way to counteract this idea. Many farmers markets, depending on what part of the city you're in, the produce can be a lot more expensive than you would go to the grocery store. In general, at our market, they're not as expensive, and often in season, they are cost competitive. But it's an extra incentive to get people doing that for people with link cards and seniors as well. So seniors can double their value. They're really amazing.
Excellent.
And then we operate a small farm stand as well, which we're starting to feature products and literature that really help drive home this message of what is a circular product. So we try and do as much local as possible, but thinking about the products that are remade, remanufactured, refabricated, reused. I think everything but recycled. We don't have a whole lot of recycled material because we didn't actually talk about this much, but in a circular system, and this is another issue with sustainability, we think one of the first things we think about in sustainability is recycling, and in a circular system, recycling is actually the last thing you want to do with the material.
Exactly, right.
There's a lot of energy that goes into it. It's a very inefficient process, and And oftentimes you get a product or a material out of it that is not as good as what you started with.
Yeah.
So not that it's bad, but it's not the starting point. And that's where I think sort of the state of environmentalism right now is like that's the first thing people think about is recycling.
Yeah, exactly.
Or being energy efficient.
Yeah.
I'm going to buy this energy efficient product because it's energy efficient without thinking about, do I need it in the first place? Or do I really need two of them?
Yeah.
You know, so it's just shifting back to a more traditional thought process when resources, materials, and energy were more scarce.
Mm-hmm.
So those are two program areas. I'm going to get back on track here.
No, you're good. You're good.
We also do research. So the research, as I said before, is looking at the potential, starting with businesses that are co-located with us here at the plant. And this year we're focusing a lot on water and spent grain. So I talked about some of the research we've done, just thinking about spent grain as fish food or livestock feed, fish, spent grain as mushroom growing medium.
Oh, right.
We're also right now using the spent grain and coffee chaff to make biobriquettes that are combustible.
Oh.
With the idea that those could be used as an offset for wood.
Right.
In the wood-fired oven on site, because then you're localizing even more.
Even more. Wow.
Right. Yeah. And then we have our aquaponics farm. I often forget about that, but it is your paradigm of a closed loop system where the nutrients from the fish, their outputs, which is high in nitrogen, is used to supply nutrients to the plants which love lots of nitrogen.
Yeah.
The roots help filter the water, and we send it back to the fish. So in that system, you actually have we never lose. The only nutrients that leave the system are in the plants themselves, or I suppose in a dead fish, right?
Yeah. I was going to say you're harvesting the fish, right?
We actually are not. So as a nonprofit, we've moved away from being a production scale farm.
Right.
So there are other growers and there are other businesses that we work with. We don't want to compete with them. We want to help support them. We still grow. We'll grow lots of greens, and we're not actively harvesting the fish. If we wanted to do that, we'd have to feed them a lot more and have a much larger farm than we do.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the scale of it right now, we would lose a lot of money on it. So we're using the fish for their nutrients.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
And their charm. So that aquaponics system, when you think about the future of agriculture, growing in controlled environment conditions offers tantalizing opportunities to recapture nutrients, to not send your phosphorus and nitrogen down the drain, where it's hard to, or into the river where it's hard to recapture. It also, they can use up to 90% less water than traditional in-ground growing.
Yeah.
Those are two main advantages of it, especially when you think about the fact that 70% of the fresh water that humanity uses on the earth goes towards agriculture, and then with potential future water scarcity, controlled environment agriculture offers a really tantalizing prospect of being able to address that problem.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. So
but there's some disadvantages. There are disadvantages. You have to put energy into the system. You need pumps.
Right.
You need extra lights, and that requires electricity. If you can figure out how to do it from renewable energy, it's actually a really great idea.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've wrapped up a really nice circular economy model in this building, and you're teaching it. That's what you do at Plant Chicago. Is you're the teaching arm in big part.
We're definitely externally focused, very much focused on educating around this.
Yeah.
Galvanizing the community to move towards this. And so and really figuring out how do we do this and how do we measure it.
Right.
The circular economy, there's still a lot of questions out there about
big time.
How do we know that we have this system? How do we measure it? What are we really working toward? I mean, you can think about it's a really nice in a theoretical framework, but the practicality of it, it's hard. And it's also right now mostly being thought of at a very macro level.
Right, exactly.
And the exciting thing for me about the plant community in the backyards neighborhood where we're located, and eventually the city, is thinking about how do you do it at the facility scale?
Yeah.
how can you do it at a neighborhood level, and how do you do it at a city and a regional scale? Like where do we get to at a point where we consider Chicago a circular city?
Yeah.
I think there's some core principles that the city can work towards, but it's that practical implementation of it that everybody who's talking about the circular economy is still figuring out.
Yeah.
Like how do we actually get there? So.
Right. Well, the really cool thing is you're experimenting and showing us. So congratulations to you. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Oh, well, I think it was not within the context of my job, my current job, but there was I used to live in New York, and I was working with a public school there. I actually worked for a nonprofit, and we partnered with public schools, but working with the students, we secured a pledge for $50,000 to have a small solar array installed on the roof. And ultimately, it didn't get installed. I ran into too many hurdles with dealing with a public school or public entity, and sort of lack of interest and understanding of why program is important.
Right.
You end up talking to lawyers whose primary objective is like, I don't care about this. I just care about what we could be held liable for.
Held liable for, yeah.
Yeah.
So what was your takeaway?
My takeaway is, well, you have to get full buy-in, right?
Yeah.
At every level, oftentimes for certain projects. And there are structural, systemic issues which you can't necessarily just talk your way through.
Yeah.
Or like the social benefit is not enough, or the environmental benefit is not enough.
Yeah.
So there are real structural issues and systemic issues that will stand in people's way, and those types of issues are best handled at the government level.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that buy-in or the understanding, it's really hard.
Yeah.
There's only so far that businesses can go. I think businesses definitely have to be a major part of this. They have to be the leaders in this, but as long as the government is not leading or working against these issues,
Yeah.
too much bureaucracy, or in some cases too little or no guidance. So under-regulation is a problem. Or not providing incentives. Sometimes over-regulation can be a barrier as well.
Yeah.
So it's finding that balance. At the very least, government needs to step up and acknowledge there is a problem. That's the first. We talk about it with alcoholics. We need to talk about it with the environment. Step one: admit you have a problem.
Oh my gosh!
And it is absolutely frustrating that we're still at that, where we've gone back to that stage of denying that we have a problem in the first place. So.
We're gonna send the government to AA.
Yeah. You have to.
So, what do you consider your biggest success?
Oh, well, personally, my family. I think just raising two children, a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. I think, when I hear them talk about what's important to them.
Oh, nice.
My daughter wants to be, right now she wants to be a botanist. My son, up until recently, wanted to be a monster truck when he grew up. But both of them, seeing them, they're very curious about the natural world. You're really excited when they come to work with me. And just, I think the pride and excitement they have thinking about agricultural systems and science and the natural world, that's great. And it's probably, I think that is natural. It's instilled in every child. My children have had the privilege of being able to be able to explore a lot of that not every child does.
Right, exactly. Nice. So what drives you?
Having fun.
Having fun? Oh, gotta have fun.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't always get to do a lot of that more recently. Also, really, the natural world has had a big impact in my life. And again, when I talk about privilege, I have had the privilege to be able to be in very wild places and see the earth, at least with the appearance of not having human impact.
Right.
on it. Being able to convey that to someone that hasn't, maybe the best analogy is like an astronaut going into space and trying to convey like what that is like to someone who hasn't. I think, having not been in space, I can understand what that feels like, but I don't. Would never know that until I went into space.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing with the natural world. If you haven't had an opportunity to be in a very wild location, you don't understand what we're doing.
Yeah. So get it out in nature.
Yeah.
Get out in nature.
I mean, well, at the same time too. I mean, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and love the city. I actually, despite being a nature lover, I don't know if I could live in a remote location. I really love living in the city.
Well, I understand that.
Being able to recognize the benefits and the joys of both worlds.
Yeah, exactly.
Most people don't, and even when they live in a city, oftentimes there's all these external pressures on them.
Right.
Gun violence, economics.
Yeah. So if you could recommend one book, what would it be and why?
This is going to sound odd, and I actually haven't read it for a long time, but it's a book that's kind of haunted me for a long time. I grew up reading a lot of science fiction, people like Ray Bradbury, and Arthur C. Clarke. And Arthur C. Clarke wrote a book called Childhood's End, which I don't actually know if it's a really great book, but the whole premise of it has really haunted me because, and I am totally giving away this book. The premise is aliens come, and unlike most other books where they're either antagonistic or, have some other ulterior motive, these aliens actually have a very different agenda. They've been sent there to bring humanity into a new era where the children actually develop into like a new type of creation where everybody is kind of connected into the psychic realm, and they end up literally consuming the earth and moving on to something else. Like literally, like the dawn of this new humanity destroys the earth and like consumes it all, uses it like its food source to move on to something else. And it's like this, the allegory of both destroying our earth and using it as a creation for something else is like so entirely pessimistic and optimistic at the same time that it's disturbed me. And I can't quite get it out of my head because it's this idea that, I mean, that is how humanity is operating now. We're operating as
I was going to say
eat the whole thing.
Right.
We're going to use it up, and then we're going we'll move to Mars or some other exoplanet.
Right.
Like if we can't take care of this planet, I mean, we're not.
Why should we go
moving somewhere else?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know why that book has stuck with me for so long, and but I think it is that idea that there is within, extreme disaster, there is this sort of hope. Ultimately there's a huge sadness in there with sort of both the death and recreation of our children.
Yeah. So what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
Keep having fun and thinking about how you can make a difference and how, there are many, many simple ways to do that. And find out the business, find out businesses that you really believe in and support them. It can be a hard field to navigate these days because there isn't a whole lot of transparency, which is another reason why small markets and getting to know your
farmer, your
businesses, or your local business as well.
Right.
If you believe in them and you think they're doing the right thing or trying to do it, and you can enter into a dialogue with them, constructive dialogue, those are the businesses to support. Yeah. And at times, they're not going to be the cheapest.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Jonathan.
You're welcome. It was a great conversation. I appreciate it. Thank you.
It was an awesome conversation. So how can our listeners get a hold of you?
You can visit our website, plantchicago.org. We have many events listed there, some great events. Well, the market every Saturday and a special festival the last Saturday in July.
Ooh.
Where we have some great local bands, blues, hip-hop, Latin fusion, all off the grid. just solar powered.
Wow.
And we have tours every Saturday of the facility. We also accept interns as well. So everything, all that information should be at our website, plantchicago.org.
Perfect. And you can also find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/Plant Chicago. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast. Do you want to save money at the grocery store, eat more organic, whole foods, cultivate food security, and feel more connected to the earth? If so, then growing your own food is a no-brainer. You wouldn't believe how many people come to me claiming that they can't grow their own food. They think they don't have enough space, that they're too busy, or that they simply don't have what it takes. Perhaps you've fallen for one of these gardening myths. If you think you can't grow food, or if you think the only food that you have access to is what you buy in the grocery store, I have a life-changing webinar that you need to see. It's free and will help you unearth your inner gardener. I've helped thousands of people just like you learn to grow their own food, and I'm speaking from my own experience when I say that with the right knowledge in place, there is no such thing as a black thumb. With this webinar, you can begin making your garden dreams come true and start growing delicious, nutritious food for your family. Just text GARDEN to 44222 or go to iwanttogarden.com and you will receive our free webinar about the 7 key factors you need to know to grow your own food. Remember, that's GARDEN to 44222 or iwanttogarden.com.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen 3 days a week for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.